Welcome to Disruptive Successor, a show for next generation leaders in family businesses and entrepreneurs who want to disrupt the status quo and take their existing business to a whole new level. We all know that what got us here isn't going to get us there. This show will provide inspiration, advice, and resources to help you create massive impact. This podcast is sponsored by myself, Jonathan Goldhill, and my company, the Goldhill Group, where we provide coaching for growing companies. I'm Jonathan Goldhill, and my purpose is simple: to guide entrepreneurial leaders in family businesses towards more freedom and fulfillment. I want entrepreneurs to get clarity around the changes that will make them and their businesses more successful so they can experience the same freedom I've enjoyed in my life. Our proven practices challenge business owners to think differently about their business and how they're running it, and quite literally become game changers in our clients' companies. Learn more at thegoldhillgroup.com website, where you can schedule your free strategy session. Hi, it's Jonathan Goldhill, and welcome back to another episode of the Disruptive Successor Show. Most of us have heard that Gen Z and millennial men and women think differently than the baby boomer generation. This is a subject that is deeply interesting to me because I'm often coaching millennials who are taking over the leadership of the family business from their parent or parents. And the things this younger generation want to do are quite a bit different from their parents. And that's the work. So that's the subject also of today's podcast. My guest today is Madeline Miller, who is making executive coaching more accessible and inclusive for rising leaders, specifically Gen Z and millennial men and women. She does this work so they can take control over their careers, reduce burnout, and develop interpersonal skills and healthy resilience to become the leaders they wish they had. As a lawyer and career and leadership coach, Madeline founded Coaching with Madeline after 15 plus years spent walking the line between milestone successes and frequent uncertainty. With degrees from the University of Melbourne and UCLA, she's worked in high-profile roles across the globe, including as a production attorney on the James Bond movie franchise. Known for her easy-to-digest content bites and online resources and courses, she helps Gen Z and millennials identify and align work choices and values, gain clarity on goals, and refine interpersonal skills and influence. Madeline, welcome to the show today.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So, interesting background, production attorney, James Bond franchise. We're not going to go there, but that makes for a colorful story at the bar, I'm sure.
It certainly does. I do have quite some stories.
I bet. So tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe your background or how you got into this or line of work or why, any of those things.
So I started out, I didn't become a lawyer until I was 29. Up until then, I'd really been trying to find my way. And I really felt that there'd been a lack of kind of guidance and resources. This was the very early days of the internet. There wasn't the sort of social media presence we had now, but I really was hungry for mentorship, guidance, support, which I didn't really find easily. And when I became a lawyer, I felt happy that I had found a thing that made it look like I had a purpose, but I never really felt at home within the world or the role. And I sort of bounced around from job to job. I was like a corporate lawyer. Then I worked for the United Nations in international criminal law. I went back and I became an entertainment lawyer. And I sort of found that I thought I'd found my niche. And from there, I really took my career to new heights. I came to the US. I worked in Hollywood. I ended up, as you said, a production attorney for the James Bond franchise. And I thought, well, how good is this? I've achieved my goals. It looks quote unquote successful. I'm doing really well. But I just never felt that I was truly satisfied. And I thought, this is now 15 years into my career, and I've never really, had somebody to lead me in a way that I found impactful, and ever like truly felt at peace or sort of connected with what I was doing. So I took a really long, hard look at what I truly wanted to do and what I really felt my best sort of, I guess, contribution was. And I decided that career and leadership coaching for people earlier on their career where I had been would be a really nice marrying up of like my skills, passions, and interests. So that's sort of how I landed where I am today.
So let's talk a little bit about Gen Z and let's talk about millennials. They're both very different.
Yeah.
And let's contrast them together, if you will, to some of the other generations.
Sure.
Maybe I'll let you start with this. How would you characterize those different generations of people and how they think, how they feel, how they behave, and what's different about them?
So I think there's a lot of literature and discussion or discourse out there around baby boomers and how they were brought up at work, and they sort of are the people that are still in a lot of positions of control and gradually exiting the workforce. Then we have Gen X, who's sort of almost like the forgotten generation.
Right.
I'm on the cusp of Gen X and millennial, and I think I'm a little bit more like a millennial, but Gen X are a little bit more focused, applied, anxious, conscientious, but they sort of fall in the gaps because they don't get spoken around about as much, but they are now like 43 or 4 plus. So they are also, running companies, in senior leadership positions. Then we have the millennials, which actually are quite a big age group when you think about it. So when I talk about Gen Z and millennials, I'm usually referring to the slightly younger millennials, because a millennial could be 42, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or a
Right.
millennial could be 28. So I'm thinking more of the kind of earlier millennials and the Gen Zs. And I think the way that they get categorized, sometimes unfairly, would be that they have higher expectations of a job, higher expectations of an employer. The Gen Z in particular feel very driven by purpose, like they really want to feel like they're doing work of value, whatever that value might mean for them. Historically, the millennials have been quite concerned about the finances, and I think that Gen Z is also coming into work in a period of a lot of instability with COVID, even climate change, financial insecurity. So Gen Z are also reporting a lot of anxiety around finances as well. So they're sort of they feel a little bit financially insecure. They're driven by values and purpose a lot more than the previous generations. They have higher expectations. And I think one of the biggest factors, I think that the biggest negative factor is that the Gen Zs are reporting the highest levels of burnout in the workplace.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And why do you think that is?
I think it's a combination of factors. I think, as I said before, they've entered, they perhaps finished college, during the pandemic. Maybe they were online. Maybe they entered the workforce during the pandemic. So a lot of them haven't even had the opportunity to be working in person with other people. So I think that there's a lot of like interpersonal skills that are not being formed and developed. I think, the economic climate has made them anxious. I think that they also entered the workforce or perhaps are finishing college during, sorry, I've got a siren in the background. It's LA for you.
We don't hear it.
They were also entering the workforce during a period of great sort of social upheaval. And so I think that's all combined to make them feel less certain and confident about the future, maybe prior to compared to other generations. I think the remote work has played an enormous role. I think that there's this desire and push for flexibility in the workplace these days, but I think that it comes at a cost to the development of interpersonal skills and relationships. So I think that there is this extra level of detachment or disassociation that comes from working solely, in your own space behind a computer screen to other people. So I think that leaves them to be less connected.
So it's interesting, coaching Gen Z. One, I wouldn't think that they would have the money to pay for it. So I'm wondering if companies are paying for it and what outcomes they're seeking, that they're thinking, I want to provide some executive coaching to this generation of people. Because what I'm sensing from my clients, and this is probably coming mostly from millennials. I think that the boomers that might still be in the business, like they can't even relate at all to the Gen Z and what their mindset and approach. They think that the Gen Z has no grit. They don't show up. They don't have resilience. I'm sure things that you're talking about. And like a Gen Z's idea of burnout is a baby boomer's idea of like working hard. So, um, but the millennials are seeing something in the Gen Zs that they know they need to connect with. And certainly I can see the influence of having good core values and being clear about the purpose and maybe even being connected to something in the community that is about sustainability or that extends their brand into the social sector. I think that they like that. That's important to them. They want to feel that sense of connection. But what's going on that these Gen Zs are hiring a coach, or that the millennials are reaching out and saying, you know, we want to pay, or the boomers are reaching out and saying, I want to pay for some coaching for this person. What are they seeing?
Well, I think actually it's a matter of educating companies on how to effectively lead intergenerational workforces. Because I
Right.
think for a while there was a sense of that, like you say, like, well, they just got too high demands, right? But the shifts are happening where I think by 2025, over 50% of the workforce are going to be Gen Z and millennials. And I think Gen Zs alone are going to make up over 25% of the workforce. So as you know, the older workforce is phased out and the
Yep.
younger workers come in. We can't ignore what they want anymore. I mean, you do so at your own peril. So I think that one of the things that companies come to me for is help in managing effective intergenerational teams. And I think they see that the value in that is increased productivity, increased innovation, increased collaboration, and because prior it was just this is what work is, but now with all the sort of seismic shifts we've had to the workplace, they're realizing that they're going to have to make some changes. So there's sort of two things that can happen. I think you made a good point about Gen Zs not being able to afford coaching, which is sort of why I created the business I did, because I saw that part of the solution needed to be preventative rather than just fixing things once they were broken. So that's why I've got like group coaching programs for companies for early Gen Z employees, because that's a really cost-effective and productive way of coaching them. But also you can work with one-on-one with the senior executives, because sometimes they need help in, they need to develop better skills in managing these large, younger teams.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And as you're talking about, I'm thinking that there's almost some dangers in trying to generalize about Gen Z. And so if you're working with a team and the multiple teams in the same company could have very different attitudes among the Gen Z. And so as soon as we start to generalize about things, it becomes difficult. But a group coaching format seems to make a lot of sense, especially if you're facilitating dialogue amongst the two generations, or you're coaching a singular generation to work with each other, to help each other out, to understand what are the best practices in communicating with seniors. I don't mean old people. I mean, they're like supervisors and things like that. So very powerful, and very interesting. You have a framework that you use. You call it the AIR framework, I think.
That's right. Yes, I developed a framework.
And so how do you use this framework? Because I think as coaches, we understand the importance of having frameworks or playbooks and being able to run that same playbook or framework across many companies or clients. Tell us a little bit about the three pillars of this framework and why you created it.
Sure. It was really developed from my observations working across lots of sectors, lots of industries, lots of countries with so many different people. I started to sort of notice that there were through lines that people wanted out of work, and I sort of put those together. So the first thing I noticed was that most people want to see the value in what they're doing at work. Now, values change, and it doesn't mean that, we're all talking about social justice or anything like that, but everybody wants to feel that they are turning up to work and living with some purpose and intention. So I really focused the first pillar on alignment, as in values alignment, like what matters to you. who do you want to be when you show up at work? And are you making decisions, setting goals, choosing a career path that aligns with those values? There was actually a really interesting article the other day in Forbes, which said that misalignment burnout was one of the most common forms of burnout in the workplace. So when people don't feel aligned with their job and their work, that is like one of the quickest ways to experience burnout. And when we talk about burnout, I'm talking about an occupational phenomenon, not a mental issue. So it's like when you feel lack of interest, mentally exhausted and demotivated. So alignment is one of the key and probably the first thing I work on with people to get really clear, because without that, you can't really build the other parts. So after we get the alignment.
And let me pause there and interrupt. So in my world, alignment has multiple meanings, right? So one is, are they in the right seat? Meaning, is that the right position in the company? Are the roles that they're performing or that are expected to be performed in that seat a good fit with that person's skill sets? Do they understand it? Do they want that position? Do they have a passion, a hunger for it? And then there's alignment with understanding what that position and how it relates to the entire company, or that position's priorities or measures, and how it relates to the overall company's plans, goals, vision. So is that the kind of alignment we're talking about?
I guess, that's part of it. It's interesting how you describe it that way, because I think I'm working very much with an individual, right? So we take away the company context for a minute and we say, like, what are your professional values? And now professional values dovetail a lot with personal values. But like an example might be, some people really value transparency, right? So they really need a particular type of structure or management. They might actually do well in a more bureaucratic setting because they know exactly how they're going to move up and exactly how those things are done. Other people love teamwork and collaboration, so they're not going to work well in a remote role. They're not going to work well at a company that's very hierarchical. They're going to like a startup. So there's there's more nuances, I think, in terms of like what you want personally, and then what kind of work environment is going to get the most out of you, right? We talk about like charging your battery or depleting your battery, and it is a very personal thing. Now, these earlier professionals aren't always going to get what they want, but the earlier they start thinking about these things, they're going to understand more like how they're going to show up in their best selves and what to look for if they do consider moving roles. Because what we're seeing now is a lot of people are just quitting jobs, right, and turning to the gig economy. And I think that, going back to that sort of first point about alignment, I find that most people do want to be engaged in something that matters to them. They do want to be working. But when there's that misalignment, they'll just opt out. And that's a problem.
Yeah, I think those are great examples, and I'm glad you amplified on that because it contrasts with the way I normally think about alignment, and it adds it all together. Let's just go one step deeper and talk about assessments, the use of assessments in figuring out people's, how they're hardwired, why they behave the way they behave, what they're motivated to do. Do you find those valuable? Do you use them? Do you think that, because I think I have a file folder of all the assessments that I took as I was into my coaching career, 20 years, like different assessments to learn each time to learn a little bit more about, that's who I am. Is that important to your clients, do you think?
I think assessments are great. I think we're all, little narcissists sometimes that want to know more about ourselves. And I mean that lovingly. I'm the same. Like, I think it's great to take assessments and, without being facetious, it's not just about narcissism. It really has to find alignment. But I think assessments are great. I don't necessarily administer any formal assessments for people. What I do though, particularly with my one-on-one clients, and I'm looking for a way to scale this for like Gen Zs who may not afford one-on-one coaching but can get the access to it. But the kinds of things I look at can be a little bit left of center. So I have a values exercise I can take them through, and then I get them to rate them like their top 5 values, and then I get them to rate their negative values. And then I say, okay, so we need more of this and more and less of this, and what does this mean to you? So it's a very qualitative assessment that really comes from within, and I spend a lot of time investigating and probing, what that means to them. So often they'll say one thing, and I'll spend a lot of time and I'll say, what I'm really hearing is that you really value curiosity, like you said this and this and this, but actually I think this is what it really is distilled down to. And they're like, you're right. If I don't have curiosity, I don't have drive, so I think that the one-on-one sort of investigative process can be more valuable than generic assessments. That's not to say that I don't use other things to fill them in, but I'll use things from like the advertising world. I'll say, here are some brand avatars. These come from Jungian, human behavior. Which brand are you? Who do you want to be? Okay, and how are you showing up now? Okay, how are we going to switch how you want to show up? So assessments are great, but I take a little left of center approach.
No, but I think I like what your approach is, because I think some of the assessments are almost limiting, because then if you really latch on to a type of assessment, a disc, then you start to look at everyone through that lens.
Yeah, totally.
And then you're boxing people in, and you're boxing yourself in. And I think we're flexible, and our minds, our brains, our behaviors are flexible, and we need to understand that. So I like the approach that you're taking. I think it's really interesting. So, all right.
Sorry.
No. Say more, and then we'll get into the I part of the AIR framework. Go for it.
No, I was going to say I like it because it allows people to design who they want to be. Because it's all very well say, this is who I am, but like the brand avatars is a perfect example. I have people that say, I am, the everyman. Like, that's a brand avatar, right? I like that. I like that I'm reliable. I like that people trust me, but I really want to be the hero. And I go, okay, like let's look at the sort of gaps between the everyman and the hero. What are you doing that's preventing you from turning up as the hero? And we might go, okay, I'm a people pleaser. I don't delegate enough. I'm a perfectionist. And then that gives us a really great place to sort of dive into what do we need to work on individually. And I think, to your point, it sort of stops people being pigeonholed in like one of 5 classifications, and we all know what they mean. It becomes very personalized.
So it's kind of funny. I remember years ago working with my coach, who was also doing my branding and my marketing. And I had to fill out a sheet, a brand assessment. And I think one of the questions was, what kind of car do you drive? Or if you were a car, what car would you be? And I remember, I think I was driving an Acura at the time, but I've owned Volvos and I've owned BMWs, and they each have a different message, right? Like if you're a Volvo, that's a safe choice. It's secure. It's, it's going to get you there in more style today. If you're a BMW, you're going to experience an ultimate ride or something. And the Acura was suggesting of, it gets a good car. It works perfectly. It doesn't have great design sense or anything, but it's economical also. It's a high-end kind of economic. So it was really interesting to go through that exercise. And so I could see how you could have fun with that, left of center.
And, it's very interesting. Sometimes I'll get pretty hardcore, like engineers from the tech world, and they'll say, oh, I'm the lover. And I go, oh, tell me how you're the lover.
Whoa.
I really, but like in terms of how that's described, there's like, I really care about my team and I really want them to be happy and I really want to show them. And, so really interesting stuff can come up.
Right. Yeah. No, I have a client who's an engineer, and he'd probably say I'm a protector. He protects his team and he makes sure that they're shielded from a lot of stuff.
Interesting. I have a lot of engineering clients, and a lot of them have that characteristic.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's talk about the I in the AIR framework.
Okay. So once we've developed a little bit more of the alignment and the values identification, we move to building influence and impact, right? Mm-hmm. So this is really, like, everybody wants to be recognized for the work they do. They want to do a good job and they want to feel that they're recognized for it. A lot of people have difficulty feeling like they get the recognition they deserve. And so we go through, more of the sort of traditional coaching stuff around like their interpersonal skills. Like, have they developed, a leadership profile? What kind of leader do they want to be? What are they like at delegating? Do they hoard work? Do they have perfectionist tendencies that are holding them back? How comfortable do they feel with conflict resolution? There is a great assessment I actually do for this part called the TKI assessment, and that's a very well-established assessment that looks at your like negotiation, conflict resolution styles. And so we'll see, like, are they competitive? Are they accommodating? Do they compromise? Do they collaborate? Do they avoid? And that's really helpful in sort of getting to, again, like the individual interpersonal skills that they really need to work on. Because once again, not everyone's the same.
I think in our prior conversations before we recorded this, we were talking a little bit about the difference between aggressiveness and assertiveness. And what I've experienced with some younger generations is they don't really know they don't quite see the distinction, or they're not aware of themselves. What's your experience in that area?
100%, particularly women,
Mm,
right? Sometimes I'll say to my younger female clients, like, well, how do we feel about being assertive? And they're like, oh, I don't like that. I don't want to upset people.
ooh,
And I'm like, well, what does that mean to you? And often they describe assertiveness as what I would consider aggression. But
ah,
that's the form of like communication they're seeing, and that's what's passing, particularly in men, as assertive,
right.
right? So we really go through a whole range of different exercises and behavioral experiments, and I get them to start small. It might just be like putting your hand up in this meeting where you don't usually want to say anything, or saying no to something that you usually accommodate and it makes you feel like stressed and you don't think it's fair. Like very small experiments to start pushing the lines to finding and using their voice more powerfully in a way that feels authentic to them. I'm like, that's assertion, like that's being assertive. So I think aggression, assertiveness, passive aggression, I mean, I could do a whole podcast on these topics. I think they're very misunderstood concepts. And I think that we've had traditional forms of power modeled. And I think that we're looking at ways of changing those. And I think Gen Z are primed to change those. They have very different expectations between men and women and how you show up in the workplace. So I think, I think it's very topical.
It's interesting. So I'm a baby boomer. One of my clients is a millennial. He runs a business that's in a manufacturing-like environment. They're involved in distribution, logistics, and a lot of their younger workers in the office are Gen Z, and absenteeism is a really big problem. And I've just always associated with this is the industry and the type of job, and it's not a beautiful, attractive, aesthetic environment, which matters a lot to me, but maybe not a lot to any of these people, the employees or the managers. And so I just wonder, like, absenteeism is almost a form of aggression,
Yeah.
passive aggression.
Passive aggression, totally. Yeah.
Yep. And then there's also just legitimate reasons that they have problems, health issues, child care, caregiving for elders, transportation issues, money issues. I mean, it's hard to know where to draw and when to draw the line about
Yeah.
but I think some of this is generational to me, because as a boomer, I look at it and say, where's the grit? Where's the willingness to work hard and show up and, do whatever it takes? And yeah, don't come in sick, but come in short of anything else, that and a broken leg,
COVID
or a death in the family. Hmm?
Yeah, COVID shifted expectations around coming in sick. When I was started work, like unless you were on death's door, you turned up at work. Whereas
Hmm.
these days, it's like, oh, you're a little bit sick, stay out of the office, right? So I
Right.
think, like in a way, that we've sort of like softened our views on that. Look, I think it's very hard to sort of talk about careers and leadership and cover all sectors, right? And
Yeah.
manufacturing is a perfect example. I've never worked with anybody in manufacturing. I think, a lot of my clients come from what you would consider more of the white collar kind of job.
Sure.
So I think when you're talking about people that have very real financial pressures that literally stop them being able to come to work, or, don't necessarily have the equal power to be able to say, hey, I can't do this. Like, it's a slightly different discussion. I'm probably not equipped to talk about.
Right. Yeah.
But I think, you raised a good point. People not turning up to work can very much be a sign of a deeper problem that they are either unwilling or afraid to voice. And I think if you are an employer and this is impacting your work, you need to create an environment, the common phrase these days is an environment of psychological safety, where people feel comfortable and able to talk up without fear of reprisal or punishment. Because at the end of the day, it's, again, a productivity issue for you.
Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah.
you might get frustrated by it, but it's to serve your ultimate goal, right?
What you do, and I think probably what I do as well, but me looking at you is it has to be a very nuanced approach to each person, situation, company. So, all right, we'll
Industry,
move
culture, exactly. Yeah.
100% type of business.
I mean, one
And
example I can give from my background. So I was an entertainment lawyer, and I was working in Hollywood, that is a very aggressive way of communicating, right?
Right.
And I just adopted it because it's efficient and you're always trying to do a lot of stuff. And to me, it was like, after a while, water off a duck's back. I mean, not when you're screamed at by a lawyer in the middle of, an intersection when you're on the phone, but like someone from, let's say, Netflix is going to write me a 2-line email and I'm going to write something back. And to me, that just became normal communication. It didn't bother me. I went to England and I was working for this family production company, the James Bond franchise. And I wrote an email like, send me this thing, same kind of thing. I wasn't angry. It's just the way I communicate when I'm being efficient. And I was told, like, you sound aggressive, So like even like between countries or industries, there's different cultural expectations. So it's
100%.
very important dialogue. Yeah.
100%. Yeah, there was my girlfriend had a fashion sale this weekend and her employees were all there helping her out. And she was changing clothes in front of them. And I was thinking, like, this is the only industry that or one of the few industries where this could happen. This would be a lawsuit in a lot of other industries.
Correct.
My
Exactly.
employer got naked in front of me.
Exactly.
It wasn't quite like that, but
Yeah, I know what you
all right, but we digress. Let's get into the R part of the AIR framework. What's that?
So the R stands for resilience. And resilience is really like the overarching kind of thing we're trying to develop, and I'm trying to cultivate individuals early on.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to look at resilience sort of beyond, I guess, the traditional bro marketing concept of like grit and pain and suffering.
Right.
And healthy emotional resilience, and this was born out of my observation that everybody wants to feel like they make the best decisions for themselves and for their careers. And I think when you are when you've created time and space to connect with your intuition, you're going to develop a good decision-making framework. And those kind of decisions are the ones that are going to create the greatest kind of resilience, because you might end up not making the right decision, but if you felt you made the best decision with all the facts that you had in front of you that felt right at the time, like, you're not going to bend and break as you perhaps would have, you're not going to beat yourself up in the same way. So I think healthy emotional resilience comes from increasing self-awareness, which is the things I'm doing in those previous steps, and developing good decision-making frameworks that really is you practicing self-advocacy. This is the right decision for me, for the information I have. So then we develop the kind of resilience where we're like, okay, I did something, it didn't work out, or I had a setback, or there was a conflict, but I really like how I handled myself. And to me, that's what resilience is. And that allows us to encounter difficulties in the workplace, to face rejection, to have bad experiences without it sort of making us fall apart and break. I always think like resilience is more like being like bamboo, like you bend, but you don't break. Right. And so developing, greater values alignment, greater influence and impact are all increasing the type of self-awareness that lends to healthier emotional resilience. And I think more emotionally resilient people in the workforce is going to affect everybody. And growing up, I didn't really have, I would say, good role models of healthy emotional resilience in the workplace. I had very brittle or aggressive or short-sighted managers. And I really have been compelled to create, a next generation of leaders who do things differently.
Wow. That's really interesting work. And I imagine that there's a lot of conversations with your clients around preparing for what might be a difficult conversation and showing resilience in that, and then maybe debriefing after a difficult interaction and having to talk about, what would you have done? What would you have done differently? How would you have liked to experience it differently? Yeah. Things like that.
Yeah. Difficult conversations is the most difficult thing to do in the workplace.
Right.
And I think that it's not well taught. This, people don't learn it. They develop mechanisms for managing it, which may be maladaptive, right? Perhaps they're good at it, but that's kind of rare. It makes people deeply uncomfortable. It makes them resort to all of these types of behaviors, whether it be aggressive behaviors or passive-aggressive behaviors, right? So, and that leads to all of those flow-on problems we've been talking about. So I think managing difficult conversations is probably the core of what I teach people, like crucial conversations, conversational frameworks, looking at the substance of what's going on, the emotional part of what's going on, and the identity piece of what's going on. We call it like the 3 tiers framework. So I think that is, like, you've hit the nail on the head. That is the most valuable thing we can be working on at work within leaders and the younger generations. And I think the younger generations are disadvantaged because they are behind a screen. Like, they may have started a job and never met anybody they work with in person. It makes it a lot harder to read these nonverbal cues
Right.
for conflict resolution, right? So these are exactly the type of skills that things like group coaching can provide and improve in employees.
And you do this in person, or you do this via Zoom or something?
Yeah, I do both. So I can attend workplaces, work one-on-one, or I do it online, if that makes more sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
And group environment good. Yeah.
But do you feel the impact of being in person is a big difference than doing it over the Zoom?
I think that for the younger employees, I think the group coaching environment, even if it's done on Zoom, can be really valuable because they can bounce ideas off each other. They feel more connected. They feel like less alone. They can empathize with each other. So it actually builds that kind of community. Probably once upon a time we would have done that in person and that would have been preferable. But I think you can simulate that online in a group setting. I think one-on-one coaching, it's lovely if I can meet them at least once. It's not essential. You can develop quite a good relationship online when it's that focused. So I think, there's pros and cons to each. It's obviously much more economical and practical to do online. But I do think for the younger employees, the group coaching is the key. One-on-one coaching, I mean, it's not within their will. That's not, it's not practical or available to them, but the group coaching can be really great.
Right. Well, it's very interesting. And I found that for me, I mean, I've been doing this type of coaching on Zoom since 2005 and in groups. And I remember having a client for 9 years that I never saw. We did just telephone, or we were on what was the equivalent of Zoom, but we didn't use the camera. I don't even know if we had a camera back then.
Right. Remember when we didn't even have the cameras? It was just things on the phone, and
things have changed.
Yeah.
Well, Madeline, it's great having you on the show today. What's the point in time that someone knows that they need to reach out to someone like you?
It's interesting. When I get a one-on-one client, they usually come when there's a crisis.
Okay.
And usually that crisis can resolve itself within like 3 to 6 months, but that's when the real work can begin. So I always like to say, don't wait until there's a crisis. If you've never had coaching before, it's a really good time to start. For companies, I think anybody that has younger workforces, like, they should be thinking about this now. I think things are shifting fast, and I think that it's only going to get more pronounced as more people entering the workforce are coming on in the environment we're talking about. So I would say companies should not wait. One-on-one, do it sooner rather than later. Great.
And how would people find you, Madeline?
I have a website. It's www.coachingwithmadeline. I'm also on social media at Coaching with Madeline, and I can also leave an email in the show notes or something like that.
Sounds good. Awesome. Well, and for those of you like me I have a daughter whose name is Madeline, but spells it differently. Madeline is Madeline, kind of like Madeline. And it's been really wonderful having you on the show today. It gave me some insights into the distinctions of these different generations and how having an approach that's extraordinarily personal can really address a whole different generation's needs. So I want to thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation.
All right, great. And folks, you know the drill, right? If you got some value from this, please share it with others in your network. And please take time out to give us a great rating on your podcast listening application of choice, and stay tuned for future episodes of the Disruptive Successor Show.
This podcast is sponsored by myself, Jonathan Goldhill, and my company, the Goldhill Group, where we provide coaching for growing companies. I'm Jonathan Goldhill, and my purpose is simple: to guide entrepreneurial leaders in family businesses towards more freedom and fulfillment. I want entrepreneurs to get clarity around the changes that will make them and their businesses more successful so they can experience the same freedom I've enjoyed in my life. Our proven practices challenge business owners to think differently about their business and how they're running it, and quite literally become game changers in our clients' companies. Learn more at thegoldhillgroup.com website, where you can schedule your free strategy session. Thank you for joining us on the Disruptive Successor podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, review, and share with a friend who would benefit from the message. If you're interested in picking up a copy of my book, Disruptive Successor, go to disruptivesuccessor.com.